A mother tiger stands in front of a hunter, not to attack, but to ask for help. Her cub is trapped and weak. Time is running out. Will he save them or leave? Where are you watching from? Comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and like. The jungle was quiet, too quiet. Ryan Carter moved carefully through the dense foliage, his boots pressing into the damp earth. He had spent years hunting in this forest, but something felt different tonight. The usual sounds of the jungle were missing. No birds calling, no rustling in the trees, just silence. Ryan tightened his grip on his rifle. When the jungle went quiet, it usually meant a predator was nearby. Something was watching. A gust of wind passed through the trees, shaking the branches, sending a cascade of dry leaves onto the forest floor. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting long, twisting shadows that made the trees seem alive. Then he saw them, two glowing golden eyes staring at him from the darkness. His breath caught. A tiger. Not just any tiger. A white tiger. Its massive frame blended with the pale patches of moonlight, its muscles tense, its gaze locked onto him. It stood still, not moving, not growling, just watching. Ryan's heart pounded. A tiger this close usually meant one of two things. It was stalking him or it was protecting something. But this tiger was doing neither. Something about its eyes stopped him from raising his rifle. There was no aggression, no hunger. Instead, the tiger's gaze was filled with something else. Desperation. Ryan had seen animals in distress before. He knew when a creature was afraid, when it was in pain. This was something different. Then he heard it, a faint, pained whimper. It wasn't coming from the tiger in front of him. It was coming from somewhere behind her. Ryan's muscles tensed. He stepped slightly to the side, trying to get a better look. The tiger didn't move to stop him. That's when he saw it. A small white tiger cub, barely a few months old, was tangled in a barbed wire fence. Ryan's stomach twisted. The cub's tiny body was struggling weakly against the sharp metal, its fur matted with blood. The rusted barbs had dug deep into its leg, and every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through its small frame. The mother tiger turned her head slightly, looking back at her cub, then at Ryan. That's when he realized. She wasn't here to attack him. She was here to beg for help. Ryan swallowed hard, his pulse racing. This was madness. A wild tiger asking a human for help? Impossible. Yet here he was, standing face to face with one of the jungle's most fearsome predators, and she wasn't attacking. She was waiting. Ryan looked at the cub again. Its small chest rose and fell rapidly. Its breathing shallow, it didn't have much time. His fingers twitched near his rifle. He had two choices: walk away and let nature take its course, or do something he had never done before: help a tiger. Ryan clenched his jaw. He took a slow step forward. The mother tiger tensed, her muscles rippling beneath her thick white fur. Ryan stopped. His hands were steady, but inside his nerves were screaming. If he made the wrong move, she could kill him in an instant. He crouched down, keeping his movements slow, controlled. The barbed wire was old, rusted, likely set by poachers who had no care for what they trapped. His hand reached for the knife strapped to his belt. The cub let out another soft whimper, its small body trembling. Ryan glanced at the mother again. She was still watching, her massive paws pressing into the earth, ready to move at any second. But she didn't. She was trusting him. Ryan exhaled slowly. He reached out and carefully touched the barbed wire. The cub flinched but didn't struggle. The mother let out a low rumble, not a growl but a warning, a reminder that she was still there. Ryan ignored the sweat forming on his brow. He carefully slid the knife between the wires, sawing through the rusted metal. The first cut snapped with a sharp twang. The cub let out a small cry. The mother let out a deep, guttural breath, her tail flicking behind her. Ryan forced himself to stay calm. He moved to the next piece of wire, another snap, another jolt from the cub. Blood dripped from its wounded leg onto the dirt below. Ryan worked faster. His knife moved through the final piece of wire, snapping it loose. The cub whimpered. One last time, then collapsed, exhausted. Ryan felt his heart hammering in his chest. It was free, but it wasn't over yet. The cub wasn't moving. It was still breathing, but barely. Ryan glanced at the mother. She didn't lunge forward to take her cub. Instead, she did something he never expected. She took a single step back. Ryan's. Eyes widened. She wasn't just trusting him to free the cub, she was asking him to save it. His mind raced. The cub needed help, real help. If he left it here, even free, it might not survive the night. He looked back at the mother tiger. She blinked slowly, then turned her eyes back to her cub, then back to Ryan. Ryan took a deep breath. This was insane, but he couldn't walk away. He carefully reached out and lifted the small cub into his arms. The cub was weak, its tiny body barely able to resist. It let out a soft, tired cry but didn't fight. Ryan stood up, turning toward the mother. For the first time in his life, he saw something in an animal he never thought possible. Not fear, not rage, but hope. Ryan took a slow step forward. The mother. Tiger didn't move. She just watched. Then, as if she had made her decision, she turned and followed him. The silent jungle wasn't silent anymore. This was the moment everything changed. The cub was limp in Ryan's arms. Its tiny body barely moved, its breathing shallow. The wounds on its leg were deep, blood staining its once pristine white fur. Ryan tightened his grip, adjusting the cub's weight against his chest. It was lighter than he expected. Too light. It hadn't eaten properly in days. The mother tiger stood a few feet away, her golden eyes locked onto him. She wasn't growling, wasn't moving closer. She was simply watching, waiting. She had made her choice. But Ryan hadn't made his. This was madness. He was a hunter, not a rescuer. His entire life he had been taught that humans and wild animals do not mix. Tigers were dangerous, unpredictable, deadly. Yet here he was, holding a helpless cub, while its mother, a fully grown predator, stood. By trusting him to help. Ryan looked down at the cub. Its small chest rose and fell unevenly. If he left it here, it would die. But if he took it with him, he didn't even want to think about what could happen. Ryan exhaled sharply. There wasn't time to hesitate. He turned toward the jungle path leading back to his cabin. The mother tiger followed. The journey was slow. Ryan moved carefully through the thick jungle, his boots pressing into the damp soil, every step crunching, softly against fallen leaves. The cub let out a faint whimper, shifting slightly in his arms. Ryan glanced down. "Easy, little one," he muttered. The mother tiger padded silently behind him, her large paws barely making a sound. Every few minutes, Ryan glanced over his shoulder, half expecting her to change her mind, to lunge, to take her cub back. But she didn't. She simply followed, her muscles tense, her eyes sharp. She wasn't relaxed, far from it. But she wasn't attacking either. She was trusting. Ryan still couldn't wrap his head around it. A mother tiger, following a human, because she wanted him to save her cub. Nothing about this was normal. The cabin was just beyond the next clearing. Ryan could see the faint glow of his porch light through the trees. Relief washed over him. He wasn't sure how much longer the cub would last. Then he heard it, a rustling in the bushes. Ryan froze. The mother tiger did too. Her ears twitched, her body lowering slightly, muscles rippling beneath her fur. Ryan shifted his grip on the cub, his free hand moving toward his knife. Then, a low, guttural growl. Not from the mother tiger. From the trees, Ryan's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. A shadow moved between the trees, dark and fast. Then another. Eyes glowed from the underbrush. Wild dogs. A pack. Ryan's pulse spiked. Wild dogs were vicious. They didn't care if their prey was strong or weak. They hunted in numbers, attacking relentlessly until their target fell. And right now, they had just found something weak. The cub in Ryan's arms let out a small cry. The growls in the bushes intensified. Ryan took a slow step backward. The mother tiger snapped her head toward the sound, her lips curling back, revealing sharp, glistening fangs. The pack hesitated, but not for long. One dog darted forward, barking wildly. Another followed, its yellowed teeth flashing in the dim light. Ryan's grip on the cub tightened. The mother tiger lunged. A blur of white and black streaked across the clearing. The first wild dog barely had time to react before massive claws struck its side, sending it tumbling into the dirt. The other dogs scattered, but they didn't run. They circled, waiting for an opening. Ryan backed toward a tree, keeping his eyes on the fight. The mother tiger was outnumbered. She was fast, powerful, but the dogs were relentless. One lunged at her hind leg. She spun mid-air, claws flashing, slashing its throat open. Another tried to dart in from the side. She twisted, biting down hard on its back, snapping bone. But there were too many. A fourth dog came from behind, sinking its teeth into her hind leg. She let out a roar of pain, shaking it off, but she was bleeding now. Ryan cursed under his breath. He couldn't just stand here. He shifted the cub to one arm and pulled the hunting knife from his belt. Another dog tried to charge toward him. Ryan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and drove the knife into its side. The dog yelped, staggering. Back, blood dripping from its wound. The others saw it and they finally broke. One by one they turned and ran, disappearing into the jungle. The clearing was silent again. Ryan's chest heaved. The mother tiger stood a few feet away, blood streaking her fur, her breathing heavy. Ryan met her eyes. She was still standing, still strong, still protecting. She turned to Ryan, and this time she took another step closer. Ryan stiffened. She was inches away from him now. He could feel the heat of her breath, see the small cuts on her face from the fight. She didn't look at his face. She looked at the cub. Ryan slowly knelt down and placed the cub on the ground. The little one let out a faint sound, weak but alive. Drein. Mother tiger leaned down, sniffing her cub. Ryan held his breath. Then she licked its head. It was the gentlest thing Ryan had ever seen, a mother comforting her child. Ryan swallowed hard. He had no idea how much she understood, if she knew what he had just done for them. But then she looked at him, really looked at him, not with fear, not with aggression, with acknowledgement, with trust. And for the first time, Ryan understood. This wasn't just a wounded animal. This was a mother, and she had just fought for her child alongside him. Ryan exhaled. "The cabin's close," he said softly. "Let's go." He took a step forward, and this time the mother tiger followed without hesitation. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something more, something Ryan never thought he would find in the heart of the jungle, a bond, a connection, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The cabin was close. Ryan could see the faint outline of its wooden structure through the gaps in the trees. The soft glow from the porch light flickered in the cold night air, a stark contrast to the wild jungle surrounding it. The mother tiger walked beside him, her body low and tense. Blood streaked her white fur, evidence of the brutal fight with the wild dogs. But she wasn't slowing down. She kept pace with Ryan, her sharp eyes locked on the cub in his arms. The little one had stopped making noise. Ryan glanced down, his heart tightening. The cub's breathing was shallow, its small body limp. The wounds on its leg were worse than he had initially thought. Deep cuts where the barbed wire had dug in, dried blood crusting around the torn fur. It needed help. Now, Ryan picked up his pace, his boots crunching against the damp earth. His mind raced through the supplies he had in his cabin, some medical kits, clean bandages, antibiotics. Would it be enough? He wasn't a veterinarian. He wasn't even supposed to be here, helping a wild animal. But here he was, and he wasn't about to let the cub die. Ryan reached the porch and carefully shifted the cub in his arms. The mother tiger stopped at the steps, her massive body hovering just outside the reach of the cabin's light. She was watching, waiting. Ryan knew she wouldn't come inside. She had followed him here, trusted him with her cub, but the cabin was his territory, not hers. She wouldn't cross that line. Ryan didn't waste time. He pushed open the wooden door with his shoulder and stepped inside, kicking it shut behind him. The air inside was warm, the scent of burning wood from the fireplace filling the room. It was a stark contrast to the cold, damp jungle outside. Ryan placed the cub gently on an old blanket near the fire. The tiny creature barely reacted. His chest tightened. He had to act fast. He grabbed his first aid kit from the shelf and crouched. Beside the cub, his hands moving quickly. The first step, clean the wounds. He pulled out a bottle of antiseptic and a clean cloth. Pouring the liquid over the cloth, he pressed it gently against the cub's injured leg. The moment the liquid touched its wound, the cub let out a weak cry, its body twitching in pain. Ryan winced. "I know, little one. I know. But this has to be done." Outside, a low rumbling sound filled the air. Ryan looked up. Through the window, he saw the mother tiger pacing near the edge of the trees. She had heard her cub cry. Ryan kept his movements slow and careful. He continued cleaning the wound, dabbing away the dried blood, making sure there were no signs of infection. When the wound was clean, he pulled out a roll of bandages and began wrapping the cub's leg. The small creature barely moved, too exhausted to fight. Ryan finished the last wrap and sat back, exhaling. It was done. The cub was safe. For now. But this was only the beginning. A soft thud came from outside. Ryan stood up, moving to the window. The mother tiger was still there. She had laid down just outside the porch, her massive head resting on her paws. Ryan frowned. This was unusual. She should have taken her cub and disappeared into the jungle. That was how wild animals worked. They didn't stay. But she wasn't leaving. Ryan stepped onto the porch, the wooden planks creaking beneath his weight. The tiger lifted her head slightly. Her golden eyes locked onto him. Ryan took a slow breath. "Oh, your cub's going to be all right," he said, even though he knew she wouldn't understand. She blinked, but nothing more. Ryan hesitated, then turned back into the cabin. He left the door open, not wide enough to invite danger, but not closed either. Silent gesture. If she wanted to watch over her cub, she could. Ryan moved back to the fire, sitting beside the cub. He could still feel the mother's presence outside, watching, waiting. He wasn't sure how long she would stay, but for now, they had reached an unspoken agreement, a truce, a fragile bond between a hunter and a mother desperate to save her child. And Ryan had no idea what that would mean for both of them. The night stretched on. Ryan sat near the fire, his gaze locked on the small white cub resting on the blanket. The faint rise and fall of its tiny chest reassured him. It was still breathing, still fighting. He had done all he could. Cleaned the wounds, stopped the bleeding, and wrapped the leg tightly. Now it was up to the cub to pull through. Outside, the mother tiger hadn't moved. Ryan could see her through the open doorway, lying near the edge of the porch. She didn't sleep. She barely blinked. She was still watching, still waiting. Ryan had seen animals act out of instinct before. He had watched a deer risk its life to save a fawn. A bird refused to leave a dying chick. But this was different. Mother Tiger had made a choice. She had led a human to her injured cub, trusted him, followed him, and now she was still here. Ryan exhaled, rubbing his face with both hands. He was exhausted, but there was no way he was going to sleep tonight, not with a wild tiger right outside his door, not with a cub still hanging on by a thread. A soft whimper broke the silence. Ryan's head snapped toward the cub. It stirred, its small body shifting slightly. Its bandaged leg trembled as it tried to move, but it was still too weak. Ryan reached out, brushing his fingers gently along its fur. "Easy, little one," he murmured. The cub blinked slowly, its pale blue eyes glassy but open. Then, to Ryan's surprise, it weakly nuzzled against his hand. His breath caught. That single movement, so small, so fragile, sent a strange warmth through his chest. The cub wasn't afraid of him anymore. It recognized him, trusted him. Ryan swallowed hard and looked toward the open door. The mother tiger was still watching. She had seen everything. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the mother tiger rose to her feet. Ryan tensed. She took one step forward, then another. Then, she placed one massive paw onto the wooden porch. Ryan's heartbeat thundered in his chest. She was coming. Closer. His hand instinctively drifted toward his knife, but he didn't grab it. He didn't move. The tiger reached the doorway, her huge head lowered, her golden eyes scanning the small interior of the cabin. Her nostrils flared as she took in the scent of fire, wood, and her cub. She exhaled, a slow, deep sound that sent shivers down Ryan's spine. Then, as if she had made her decision, she took the final step inside. Ryan held his breath. The mother tiger was inside his home, less than 10 feet away, close enough that he could see the scars along her fur, the subtle rise and fall of her powerful muscles. She moved with silent grace, her paws making almost no sound against the wooden floor. Ryan's mind screamed at him to react, to run, to grab his knife, to protect himself, but he didn't. He stayed perfectly still, because he knew she wasn't here to attack him. She was here for one reason only. Her cub, the mother tiger, stepped toward the blanket. her enormous frame lowering as she crouched beside her baby. She sniffed the cub carefully, nudging it with her nose. The cub let out a tiny, weak mewl in response. The mother let out a sound Ryan had never heard before, a deep, rumbling chuff, a sound of reassurance, of comfort. Ryan exhaled slowly. She had accepted his help. This was her choice, to trust him, to let him save her cub. Ryan leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "You're welcome," he muttered under his breath. The mother tiger blinked at him, and to his utter disbelief, she laid down beside the fire, right there, in his cabin, a full-grown white tiger resting in the same space as a human. Ryan let out a shaky breath. Tonight, something unbelievable had happened. A barrier had been broken, a bond had been formed, and as the fire crackled softly, casting flickering light against the wooden walls, Ryan realized this was just the beginning. Ryan barely slept. The fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow across the small wooden cabin. The warmth should have been comforting, but his mind refused to rest. How could it? There was a full-grown white tiger lying just a few feet away, her. Breathing was slow and steady. Her massive body curled protectively around her injured cub. The little one was still weak, but at least it was alive. Ryan sat against the wall, watching them. This should have been impossible. A wild tiger, willingly staying in a human's shelter. A mother, trusting a hunter. Yet, here they were. The air was thick with something unspoken, an understanding that went beyond words. But Ryan knew this peace wouldn't last. The jungle was never quiet for long, and danger was always watching. A sudden noise outside snapped Ryan's attention to the door, his. Instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle and moved carefully toward the window. The moonlit jungle stretched out before him, silent except for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Then he saw it. A set of footprints. Fresh. Ryan's heart pounded. Someone had been here. He glanced at the mother tiger. She was awake now, too. Her ears twitched, her body tense. She sensed it as well. They weren't alone. Ryan cursed under his breath. He had a bad feeling about this, and he was right, because in the distance, just beyond the tree line, he saw the faint glow of flashlights, moving closer. His stomach dropped. Poachers. Ryan turned back to the tigers. The mother was already on her feet, her muscles tensed, her sharp eyes locked on the door. She knew, she could feel the danger. Ryan moved quickly. He grabbed his bag and stuffed in the few supplies he had left. Medical kits, water, some food. They had to leave. Now. He crouched next to the cub. It was still weak, but it would have to hold on. Ryan scooped the little one up into his arms. The mother tiger let out a low warning growl, not at him, but at the unseen threat outside. She took a step forward, her massive frame blocking the doorway, her head low. She wasn't running. She was ready to fight. Ryan clenched his jaw. "No, we're not staying," he muttered. The mother tiger looked at him, her golden eyes burning with intensity. For a moment he thought she wouldn't move. Then she turned. She understood. Ryan exhaled in relief. "All right, let's go." They slipped into the night. The jungle was alive with sound. Leaves crunched beneath Ryan's boots as he moved swiftly through the trees, careful not to jostle the cub too much. The mother tiger moved silently beside him, her eyes flicking in every direction, scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. Ryan's heart pounded. He could still hear the distant voices of the poachers. They were getting closer. They knew something was here. Ryan pushed forward, moving faster. His cabin was no longer safe. He needed to get to higher ground, deeper into the jungle where the trees were thick and the paths were harder to track. But time was running out. A sharp snap echoed through the trees. Ryan froze. Then, a voice. "Over here." Ryan's blood turned cold. They had been spotted. A gunshot rang through the night. The sound was deafening, cutting through the jungle air like a blade. Ryan ducked, shielding the cub. His ears rang as the bullet tore through the trees, splintering bark just inches from where they stood. The mother tiger let out a deafening roar. It wasn't just anger. It was a warning. A second gunshot. Ryan didn't wait. He ran. The mother tiger was right beside him, her massive body moving effortlessly through the jungle, her growls echoing through the trees. Another gunshot. Ryan cursed. The poachers weren't just hunting, they were tracking. And they weren't. Giving up. The cub whimpered weakly in his arms, its small body trembling. Ryan's breath came in short gasps as he pushed forward. He could feel his muscles burning, the weight of the cub slowing him down. He needed to think. Fast. Up ahead, the jungle split into two paths. One led toward the river, open, exposed, dangerous. The other led toward the mountains, steeper, harder to climb but easier to hide. Ryan made his choice. He veered left toward the mountains. The poachers wouldn't risk following them there, not at night. At least, that's what he hoped. The mother tiger followed without hesitation. The terrain grew. Rougher, the trees denser. Vines twisted around fallen logs, and the ground became uneven. Ryan's lungs burned, his arms aching from carrying the cub. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not until they were safe. After what felt like hours, they reached a small rocky clearing. Ryan collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The cub let out a weak sound, its tiny body pressing against his chest. Ryan looked up. The mother tiger stood a few feet away, her body still tense, her ears flicking at every small sound. She was listening, waiting, making sure they weren't followed. Ryan swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. They had barely made it. But the danger wasn't over. The poachers knew there were tigers here now, and they wouldn't stop until they found them. Ryan exhaled, his jaw tightening. They needed a new plan. Somewhere safe to go. Somewhere the poachers couldn't reach them. He turned to the mother tiger. She was still watching the jungle, her muscles rippling with tension. Ryan followed her gaze. Up ahead, past the thick trees, there was a narrow ridge leading even higher into the mountains, a place where humans rarely went, a place where tigers could disappear. Ryan looked at the cub in his arms, then back at the mother. She was waiting for him, for his choice. Ryan took a deep breath, and then, without hesitation, he stood up and kept moving. Ryan didn't stop. His legs ached, his lungs burned, and his arms felt like they would give out from carrying the injured cub. But he kept moving. The mother tiger walked beside him, silent and watchful, her golden eyes scanning the jungle. She knew they were still in danger, and so did Ryan. The poachers were behind them, somewhere in the darkness, searching. But Ryan had one advantage. He knew these mountains better than they did, and if they could make it high enough, deep enough, they might just disappear. The path grew steeper. Ryan's boots slipped on the loose dirt, but he steadied himself, adjusting his grip on the cub. The little one let out a faint sound, barely awake. Ryan's jaw tightened. The cub wouldn't last much, longer without rest, but stopping wasn't an option. Not yet. The mother tiger paused for a moment, glancing up at the dark ridge ahead. She was waiting for him. Ryan exhaled and pushed forward. If she wasn't giving up, neither was he. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a hidden plateau. Ryan slowed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The clearing was surrounded by towering cliffs and thick trees, shielding it from sight. The ground was soft, covered in moss and fallen leaves. A small stream trickled nearby, fresh water glistening under the moonlight. It was perfect. A place where the tigers could rest, a place where they would be safe. Ryan carefully knelt and set the cub down onto the cool earth. The mother tiger stepped forward immediately, lowering her massive head. She nudged the cub gently, her warm breath rustling its fur. The cub stirred, letting out a small, weak sound. Ryan felt a tightness in his chest. It was still fighting. The mother turned to him, watching, waiting. Ryan swallowed hard and pulled out his supplies. He needed to check the bandages, make sure the wound wasn't getting worse. The mother tiger didn't stop him. She simply sat beside, her cub, her golden eyes never leaving Ryan's hands. She trusted him, and Ryan wasn't about to break that trust. He worked quickly, his fingers careful as he unwrapped the old bandage. The wound was still deep, but it wasn't infected. That was a good sign. Ryan pulled out a clean cloth, dipping it into the cool stream before pressing it gently against the cub's leg. The little one flinched, but it was too weak to fight. "You're doing good, kid," Ryan murmured. He reached for a fresh bandage and began wrapping the wound again, tighter this time. When he finished, he sat back, exhaling. The cub was still breathing, still alive. Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The night passed slowly. Ryan sat by the stream, his back against a rock, exhaustion weighing down on him. The mother tiger curled around her cub, her massive body shielding it from the cold. She didn't sleep. Neither did Ryan. They both listened for footsteps, for voices, for anything that meant danger was still following them. But the jungle was silent. For the first time in hours, they were safe. Ryan let out a slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, they had made it. As dawn broke, golden light spilled through, the trees washing over the clearing. Ryan stretched, his muscles stiff from the long night. The mother tiger lifted her head, blinking in the soft morning light. Ryan turned to check on the cub, and for the first time since the night began, it was sitting up, his chest tightened. The little one was still weak, but it was awake, alive, fighting. Ryan felt something deep inside him shift. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about hope. The mother tiger slowly rose to her feet. She stretched her powerful body, then padded over to Ryan. For a moment he tensed. She was too close. Closer than she had ever been. But she didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She just looked at him, and then to Ryan's complete shock, she lowered her head, not in submission, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. A silent thank you. Ryan's throat tightened. He had spent years in the jungle. Years tracking, hunting, surviving. But this moment, this bond, was something he never could have imagined. He had saved her cub, and in return, she had given him something he didn't even know he needed. Purpose. As the sun climbed higher, Ryan knew it was time to go. He had a choice to make, stay or leave them to the wild. He looked at the mother tiger. She wasn't just watching him anymore, she was waiting for his decision. Ryan exhaled, and then, without a word, he picked up his pack, took one last look at the cub and started walking. And the mother tiger, silent as ever, followed. The jungle was alive again. Birds called from the treetops, insects hummed in the thick undergrowth, and the warm scent of damp earth filled the air. The storm of the previous night had passed, leaving everything fresh and glistening under the morning sun. Ryan adjusted the straps of his bag and glanced over his shoulder. The mother tiger walked a few steps behind him, her golden eyes sharp and alert. The cub, though still weak, was nestled against her side, moving slowly but steadily. They were stronger now, but Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that danger wasn't far behind. The poachers wouldn't give up that easily. They had seen the tigers, and if Ryan knew anything about men like them, he knew they would come back. Ryan led the way up a narrow mountain path, weaving through thick vegetation. Every few steps he checked their surroundings, listening for anything unusual. A twig snapping, footsteps in the distance, the low murmur of voices. But for now the jungle was quiet. Still, he didn't trust it. The mother tiger moved beside him, her muscles rippling beneath her thick fur. She was listening too. They both knew the truth. They were being hunted, and when the moment came, they would have to be ready. The climb grew steeper. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow, his breathing steady but strained. His body ached from exhaustion, but he kept going. The cub let out a soft whimper. The mother tiger stopped, nudging it gently with her nose. Ryan turned back. "We need to rest soon," he muttered. The cub was still too weak for long distances, and they couldn't afford to push too hard. Ryan scanned the landscape. Ahead he spotted a rocky overhang, a natural shelter carved into the mountainside. Perfect. He nodded toward it. There. The mother tiger didn't hesitate. She nudged the cub forward, guiding it toward the shaded area. Ryan followed. He set down his bag, stretched his sore muscles and pulled out a small canteen of water. As he drank, he kept his eyes on the tree line below. The jungle stretched endlessly, its thick green canopy concealing everything beneath it. If someone was following them, they could be anywhere. Ryan's grip tightened around his rifle. It was only a matter of time. Then he heard it. A low murmur. Voices. His entire body tensed. He turned his head slightly, focusing on the sound. It was faint, too far to see, but close enough to be real. They weren't alone. The mother tiger lifted her head, her ears twitching. She had heard it too. Ryan cursed under his breath. The poachers had found their trail, and they were closing in. Ryan moved quickly. He pulled his bag over his shoulder and knelt beside the cub. "We have to move," he whispered. Cub let out a soft sound, weak but alert. The mother tiger stood up, her body low to the ground, her eyes burning with warning. Ryan stepped forward. Then he froze. A sharp click echoed through the air. Not a bird, not an animal. A gun being loaded. Ryan barely had time to react before, bang! A bullet shattered the air, slamming into the rock just inches from where he stood. "Move!" Ryan yelled. The mother tiger let out a deafening roar. Then everything exploded into chaos. Ryan ran. The cub limped after him, the mother tiger at its side. More gunshots rang out, bullets tearing through the trees. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed forward, dodging branches and loose rocks. The mountain path was treacherous, but they had no choice. They had to escape. He could hear the poachers yelling behind them, their footsteps pounding through the jungle. Then, another shot. Ryan felt something whiz past his shoulder, so close he could feel the heat of it. He dove forward, rolling onto the ground just as another bullet hit the dirt where he had just stood. His heart pounded. They weren't just hunting the tigers anymore. They were hunting him. Ryan scrambled to his feet. He turned sharply and raised his rifle. He didn't want to kill anyone, but he wasn't going to let them win. He aimed at the nearest figure, a man in dark clothing, his gun raised. Ryan fired. The shot wasn't lethal, but it hit the poacher in the shoulder. The man let out a yell and stumbled. Back. Ryan didn't wait. He grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into the air, creating a thick cloud of dust. Then he turned and ran. He needed to get the tigers out of here. Fast. Up ahead, the path split into two. One way led down the mountain, too open, too exposed. The other led into a cave hidden by thick vines. Ryan made his choice. "This way," he called. The mother tiger didn't hesitate. She nudged her cub forward, guiding it toward the cave entrance. Ryan followed, his pulse racing. They disappeared into the darkness, the sounds of the jungle fading behind them. But Ryan knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp. Ryan pressed his back against the stone wall, catching his breath. The mother tiger sat beside her cub, her ears still twitching, her body still tense. She was listening, waiting. Ryan exhaled and reloaded his rifle. If the poachers followed them here, he would be ready. The mother tiger turned to him, her golden eyes locked onto his. They weren't just two creatures surviving anymore. They were fighting together. Ryan clenched his jaw. They had one chance, one final stand, and he wasn't about to let them lose. The cave was silent. Ryan's back pressed against the rough stone wall, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. His breath came slow and steady, but his heart pounded against his ribs. The mother tiger crouched beside her cub, her ears flicking at every tiny sound outside. Her golden eyes burned with intensity. She was listening, waiting, just like Ryan. Outside, the jungle rustled. Footsteps crunched against the dirt. The poachers were still hunting, still searching. Ryan knew they wouldn't leave until they found what. They came for a rare white tiger, or the man who had stolen it from them. The cub let out a weak sound, shifting slightly. Ryan glanced down. Its small body trembled, but it was stronger now. The bandage on its leg was still tight. The bleeding had stopped, and its breathing was steady. It was getting better, but they wouldn't have time to wait for a full recovery. Ryan clenched his jaw. They needed a plan. He turned to the mother tiger. She was still staring at the entrance of the cave, her muscles tense, her tail flicking back and forth. She knew the danger wasn't over, and so did Ryan. They had to make a move, before the poachers did. A voice echoed from outside. "Spread out, they're close." Ryan's stomach tightened. They had run out of time, the poachers were here. Ryan adjusted his rifle, his mind racing. He had a few bullets left, enough for a fight, but not enough to win. And even if he did fight, what would happen to the tigers? No, that wasn't an option. They had to escape. Ryan scanned the cave. The entrance was the only obvious way out, but caves often had hidden tunnels, small openings leading deeper into the mountains. If they could find one, they might have a chance. Ryan moved quickly, running his hands along the rough stone walls. His fingers traced the jagged surface, searching for anything, an opening, a crack, a hidden path. Then he felt it, a narrow gap in the rock, just wide enough for a tiger to squeeze through. Ryan's pulse jumped. A way out. He turned to the mother tiger. She was still focused on the entrance, still waiting. Ryan moved closer. "Come on," he whispered. The mother tiger blinked, then glanced at the cub. She understood. Without hesitation, she nudged her cub forward, guiding it toward the narrow opening. The cub hesitated, then slipped through the gap, disappearing into the shadows beyond. Ryan exhaled. Now, the mother. She stepped forward, lowering her massive head to crawl through. Her shoulders brushed against the stone, but she pushed forward, slipping into the tunnel. Ryan was the last. He cast one final glance at the cave entrance, listening. The poachers were closer now. Too close. Ryan turned and followed the tigers into the dark. The tunnel was tight, the air cool and damp. Ryan moved carefully, feeling his way through the narrow path. The sound of the poachers faded behind him, replaced by the quiet dripping of water against stone. Then, light. A faint glow-up. Ahead, Ryan quickened his pace. The tunnel widened, and suddenly they were outside, a hidden exit deep in the jungle, far from the poachers. They had made it. Ryan let out a slow breath, relief washing over him. But he knew this wasn't over yet. They had escaped. But they couldn't keep running forever. It was time for the final choice. The mother tiger stopped at the edge of a dense clearing, her eyes scanning the land. It was beautiful, a vast, untouched part of the jungle. No human footprints, no traps, no roads. It was safe. Ryan felt a tightness in his chest. This was where they belonged. Not in the world of men, not with him. Here, in the wild, where they were free. The cub let out a small sound, rubbing against its mother's side. She looked down, then turned back to Ryan, and for the first time, she took a step away from him. Ryan's throat tightened. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready for it. The mother tiger had trusted him. She had followed him, fought beside him. But now she had made her final choice. She was going home. Ryan swallowed hard. "Go," he said quietly. The mother tiger blinked, watching him for a long moment. Then she turned, and with one last look, she disappeared into the trees. Her cub followed, and just like that, they were gone. Ryan stood there for a long time, staring into the jungle. The silence felt different now, not empty, not lonely, just peaceful. He had done what he came to do, not as a hunter, not as an enemy, but as something else, something more. Ryan adjusted his bag, took one last deep breath, and walked away.